following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Hello and welcome to Weighted Donuts. I'm Wayne Unger. We're here to talk baseball. And today I have Forbes Magazine senior sports writer. Is that correct? You are a senior sports writer, senior baseball writer?
Yeah, it's actually for Forbes.com, not Forbes Magazine.
Okay, Forbes.com. Barry Bloom. And Barry, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Wayne.
Okay. You had a great column come out today, and it's titled, MLB Managers Are Hired to Be Fired. Here's the most tenuous names on the list. So, it seems as though, you let off with Dave Martinez. Do you think the Nationals regret letting Dusty Baker go?
No, I don't think they regret it. I think they just, I don't think the Lerners really wanted to pay him. He came in at an under market contract when they signed him the first time around. And when Mike Rizzo went in to get the money for him for the extension, they balked. So, the Lerners don't want to pay big money for a manager. So Davey Martinez is, under $1 million, and he's right around their style.
Okay. So along those lines, do you think it's penny wise and pound foolish to try to go cheap on a manager?
Well, it's the way the trend has gone in baseball over recent years. The day of the $6 million manager like Joe Madden, Bruce Bochy, Mike Scioscia, it's gone. I mean, those guys, Bochy is about to retire. Madden could be ousted at the end of the year. Scioscia's gone. Joe Girardi's gone. You can just go down the list. There are tons of guys out there, Dusty. They all want a job, but there's no place for them in the market for that kind of money. Now, you've had a few guys, like Tito Francona. They re-upped him this year, and they're paying him well. But it's kind of few and far between. They'd rather go cheaper because the manager is more disposable now than he's ever been.
Do you think we'll start seeing a trend with veteran managers like we have been seeing with veteran players getting squeezed by the market and signing for money that we never thought we would have seen them sign for in the past?
I don't think so because unless you're like Dusty really wanted to get back in and get another chance, so he came in at under $2 million a year when the Nationals gave him the opportunity. But unless you're desperate, I think guys like Girardi, Girardi wanted $4 million from the Yankees, and, they were ready to move on anyway. So it gave them a convenient reason to balk. And if you remember, even back in the day, back in 2007, when they lowballed Torrey after the team went to the playoffs 12 years in a row and won 4 World Series, 6 pennants under him, they basically gave him a make-good contract depending on how far in the playoffs they went. And Joe basically told him to forget it and wound up signing with the Dodgers where he finished. So this is a trend that's been going on for a while. And these are proud guys with track records. They have consulting jobs. They should have enough money. In Girardi's case, he's working for the network. I think they're fine, and they want to be paid what they're worth. You can't underpay a manager and have him go in the clubhouse with people who are making a lot more than him and have him have any sort of credibility in the clubhouse.
Well, yes, but it to me it also speaks to it speaks to what we want our best guy no matter what they're making. And that should also we're ball clubs as fans, we want our ball clubs to put the best guys on the field. we don't want them. Well, I got to play this guy because we're paying him $10 million a year more than this kid. So, but
well,
no,
that gets extended to managers too. But what I'm telling you is it's all part of what's evolved in Major League Baseball and how things have changed and how analytics also have taken over the sport. The the situation now is that a manager, it's a very bad job. You're a middle management guy stuck between front office that's telling you what to do, how to run the team, who to put on the field, what lineups to play, and when it blows up, the front office never comes forward and admits that they made a mistake. They let the manager take the fall. The manager has to take the fall in the clubhouse with the players and basically sell it to the players. The manager twice a day has to sell it to the media, and people look at you after a while. We're watching what you're watching. Don't try and explain it away because his job is to cover for upper management. He's not going to refute upper management. They're the guys who are paying for him. So they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. It's just a completely different job than back in the day when the manager ruled over the players, the general manager. Really the twain once never met because the general manager would go out and get the players. The manager would really not have that much input in that, except for cursory. And then his job was to manipulate those players and get the best out of them on the field, no matter how much they made. But that era is over.
Okay. Now, to just let everybody out there know what the list you had. Besides Dave Martinez, on the list you had Joe Madden, Gabe Kapler, Andy Green, Don Mattingly, Scott Survey, Ned Yost, and Mickey Callaway. Out of that list, do you think there's a good chance one of them does not make it to the end of the season?
No, I think they'll all make it to the end of the season at this point. But I think the results of the season are going to predicate whether they're back or not, especially for guys who aren't on, or aren't on long-term contracts. So as I said, if Madden takes the Cubs to the World Series again, whether they win or not, it's probably going to be very difficult for the Cubs to get rid of him. Anything short of that, even just a fifth playoff spot in a row, is probably going to mean his demise because they just don't want to pay him that kind of money anymore when they can pay somebody else for a lot less that Theo and Jed Hoyer can control more than they control Madden. So, yeah, I think you're gone from the point here in time where anybody's going to get fired in the last 2 months of the season. That's happened before, but I just don't think it's going to be the case with these guys.
Okay. And so, other than Madden, if he doesn't take them at least to the World Series, who would you give the greatest odds of not coming back? The best odds. So, me personally, I think it's Mattingly for a number of reasons, particularly because his contract expires, and I think they stayed with him because they just didn't want to pay. They didn't want to pay his contract and hire another manager. So, who do you think is the most likely to go?
So I have to agree with you on that. I think Mattingly's done. And, my conversations with him earlier in the season, it sounds to me like he's reconciled to it. He's a pretty tough guy. He walked on the Dodgers when he had a year to go on his contract and then won 3 division titles in a row because he just didn't want to deal with, Farhan and Friedman and their style of management. And then, he jumped into this situation in Miami. And, for a lot of reasons that had nothing to do with him, the whole thing went south, starting really with the death of Jose Fernandez, which I wrote about and how it affected him and the whole franchise, and it still affected the franchise. And I wrote about that earlier in the year, too. So I think Mattingly is probably, a dead bang to go. I think Ned Yost is probably done. He's had a great career, and the team is in a rebuilding phase. And I could see them wanting to get, a fresh young face who's more analytic, work with their whatever rebuilding project they've had. I mean, you figure, except for the 2 years, 2014 and 15, that they won the pennant and then the World Series, the Royals haven't been in the postseason since 1985 for most of that time. So it's like they're in another one of those downturns again, and who knows how long that's going to last. And if I'm a guy like Ned, why would I want to sit there and put up with it? It's different for Joe because, he's got a caliber team there that's put in place with additions and subtractions to be competitive every year. The way baseball works now, it's a tough go most of the year to win your division or a playoff spot. And then even if you run away with it, like the Yankees are doing, Dodgers are doing, I mean, once you get to the playoffs, it's a complete reset. And depending on matchups and injuries and where teams are at that time of year, you could lose out regardless of how well you've done during the regular season. So it's very hard to repeat, but you've got a team that's competitive there. The same thing with the Nationals. They're a team that's competitive year in and year out. They've had 7 managers since they came to Washington in 2005 from Montreal. They've let go some pretty good guys, in the interim. So, they can move on to somebody else. Although I think that Davey's got another year on his contract, but it's for such a pittance, they could pay him off, make him a consultant or something, and go on to somebody else there too. But at least there's another situation where, you have a competitive team. Philadelphia is a highly competitive team. The Padres are getting in that direction, although, in Green's behalf, he had a couple of years there where, they went through a complete rebuilding process, playing younger players that were coming up through the system or retreads. And then this year, they left him without a veteran starting pitching staff, and it killed his bullpen early on. There really wasn't much he could do. But I just think after a while, it just gets old, and you can't keep losing over and over and over again. I mean, since A.J. Preller took over as general manager there, he's over 100 games under 500. And you've got, Green, who was hired a year and a half later. He's 85 games, 86 games under 500. And the losing just begets losing after a while, and you just have to make changes and start all over again. But that's an organization that's got some talent. So essentially, really, you're looking at, on the group, Miami and Kansas City as being total rebuilding projects.
And, we get a lot of New York fans listening to this. Well, no, let me rephrase that. Out of my 10 listeners, I'd say most of them are New York fans. So, and so what about Mickey Callaway? Where do you think he sits right now?
He's another guy who's I think he may be. I think he's done. They signed him to a 2-year deal. My guess would be whether they make the playoffs or not, unless they really just catch a backwind and basically go deep into the playoffs, I would guess that he's gone, because it's not Brody's guy. He's going to want his own guy in there, and you know how that all is. And I just think Mickey has proven that even as a former pitching coach, he's had a hard time even adjusting to building a pitching staff. I mean, his pitchers, from my understanding, is they really don't like him. And it was a hard replacement for Terry Collins, who everybody really liked and did very well there. I mean, Collins had the Mets in the playoffs a couple of times, went to the World Series. I mean, he's one of the winningest managers, if not the winningest manager in Mets history. And Alderson just got pissed off at him and disposed of him at a time where they could have kept him on. And, but again, it's where these guys are. Alderson hired him, and then, they had, after years of arguing with each other, basically their relationship had completely soured. And you have the same thing with Theo, who, if you remember, he went to on the road to meet Madden in his mobile home to pitch him to come join the Cubs after he walked away from Tampa. And that's how badly he wanted him. And now, their relationship is soured. I just think it's very difficult to stay friendly with each other. I admire Arizona for the fact that Mike Hazen and Torey Lovello came over here together from Boston. I think they're very close. I think they have their ins, their outs. They argue with each other. There are differences of opinion, but publicly they really show a united front on what they're doing there, and they're very detail-oriented. And the Diamondbacks are a team that shouldn't be anywhere right now, but they're still 3.5 games out in the wild card, considering that, they let A.J. Pollock and Corbin go to free agency last year without making any offers and traded their two franchise players, Goldschmidt and recently Greinke. But they're still hanging around. They play hard. They're a good defensive team. Their defensive metrics are better than almost anybody. I mean, they're so good that they're third in the league in runs prevented by defense. Now you look at the Yankees, who do exactly the same thing, and they're 30th in the league. And I watch Yankee games, and it drives me crazy because opposing teams are always putting the ball where a Yankee is not playing on the shift, as opposed to the Diamondbacks, where invariably they'll be in the shift and the ball will be hit right at the guy, right in the position where he should be. There was a line drive in a Washington game the other day that was just an example. They had two guys playing close to each other at third base, and the ball was hit right next to the second guy that was plugged between the third baseman and the shortstop. Those are things with a team that has, marginal talent and limited resources, that those are the things that can make you competitive and keep you in contention all year long. And it's fun to watch a team like the Diamondbacks do that.
Yeah, it's funny. Speaking of Callaway, going back to like George Bamberger when he was hired by the Mets, it seems as though these, for lack of a better word, these legendary pitching coaches haven't had great success as managers.
Pitching coaches don't make very good managers. I think there's only 5 in history that have won the World Series. When it was, and the list includes Dallas Green and Tommy Lasorda and, a couple of guys, a guy from the Cardinals back in the 1940s. I mean, Bob Lemon, when he took over for Billy Martin in 1978 and pulled the Yankees through to win the World Series, it's tough. And you watch like guys like Bud Black, who are great guys and good baseball guys. They're marginal managers because pitchers only have a very narrow view of the game. Now, on the other hand, if you look at catchers are involved in every facet of the game, especially if they're a backup catcher or a catcher with limited playing time, because they have to do it when they're in the game. They do it when they're on the bench. They study a lot. They have to know how to deal with a pitcher and call a game and deal with the pitching staff. They have to know where the defense is played, and they have to hit. So invariably, you go down the list of Socha, Torrey, Girardi, Bob Melvin, Bob Brenly. I mean, invariably the best managers are catchers, and there's a good reason for it. Pitchers don't make good managers.
No, I agree. And one other thing with the Mets. So when the Mets hired Brody, what was your initial thought?
My initial thought was, this hasn't worked. Every time an agent is hired in a management position in baseball, it's basically been a disaster. The two that come, freshest to mind is Jerry Kapstein when he was hired to run the Padres as president, and then Jeff Morad when he ran the Diamondbacks and then the Padres, and essentially made just horrible baseball operations decisions. I mean, why an agent whose job is to go and represent a player financially and get the most for that player out of a team, why that agent thinks that he knows baseball operations and how to evaluate talent is beyond me. So, I even said this, to Brody, who I know pretty well, and I said to him, asked him that question at the general managers meetings in San Diego last November, and I go, how are you going to be any better? And he goes, you'll see, it's going to be a lot better. Well, it hasn't. It's just they don't know what they're doing in terms of like evaluating talent, and they make very bad decisions, and they rely on guys who were their players when they were an agent, which is absolutely the worst way to go. I mean, the worst baseball decision the Diamondbacks ever made was when Morad signed Russ Ortiz to one of the highest contracts for a pitcher in baseball history, and that he was a client when he was an agent, and then they have to wind up paying off to release him the highest amount of money of any player to just buy a way out of a contract. It's pretty typical of the way things are when it comes to these kind of things with a guy like that.
So now something that I sort of alluded to earlier as far as veteran players, getting squeezed out more and more. Do you think there will be a change to the agreement to the collective bargaining agreement before it expires in regards to free agent movement?
I doubt it. I mean, I think that what it does is, once the Players Association, and where it was left when we talked to Rob Manfred and Tony Clark at the All-Star game was, Manfred said they had a preliminary meeting and they told the Players Association that if you want changes in the current agreement, we're certainly willing to listen, but we're happy with it the way it is. Well, of course. So if you have things that you want to have changed, give us proposals and we'll talk. My idea is, my understanding is that they've had, one meeting since then. So, I mean, what you're going to do is you have the 2020 season and you have the 2021 season to negotiate the new basic agreement. So this gets a start to collective bargaining a little early so that you just don't go into the 2021 season and now everything is on the brink and you have to start from scratch. I mean, there's also a lot of rules changes that some of them were implemented this year. A lot of them are going to be implemented next year. You're going to go to the pitcher having to throw to 3 guys at a minimum in an inning. You're going to go to a 26-man on the roster that has to be a non-pitcher. You're going to go to 28-man call-ups in September rather than 40. You're going to go to a restriction on position players. I think you're going to have to designate a position player who's eligible to pitch in every game during regulation. Obviously, if a game goes 17 innings, it's a different story. But you can't have a thing like you did here the other night where Davey Martinez, put Gerardo Parra and Brian Dozier in the game to pitch the 9th inning when he had ample bullpen guys that he just didn't want to use. That's all going to be gone. So all this, they want a pitch clock. That that hasn't happened yet, but that's certainly on the table. The electronic strike zone is being tested down in the Atlantic League right now. They have that technology available in every ballpark now with TrackMan and StatCast, and that's going to happen. There's no doubt about that in my mind. So you have all these things on the table aside from the financial issues that are going to have to be negotiated with players and umpires. So you might as well get it started right now. As far as the older players, I think what you had it is now the same analytics that general managers and baseball ops presidents and vice presidents are using to play games. They're now using to map out how much money they should pay a guy and when it becomes a diminishing return because at a certain age, and I call them first blush and second blush and third blush free agents, the guys who are 32 years old, a guy like Adam Jones, he got probably what he should have gotten, $3 million to play for the Diamondbacks this year on a 1-year contract only. You don't want to have him out till he's 35, 36 when you're paying him and he's falling off a cliff. But on the other hand, you undervalue your younger stars who are under control for you before they get to arbitration. And like the Yankees are paying nothing to Aaron Judge, they're paying nothing to Gary Sanchez. They're all under $1 million. Only a guy they paid, one of their young guys, and they paid out this year was Severino. And as soon as they paid him and extended his contract, he got hurt. So I think you have to have, even though $555,000 to anybody in real life as the minimum salary is a hell of a salary, I'd like to have it. But in baseball terms, with the amount of money you're talking about in a business that is generating $10 billion in gross revenue a year, if not more, that it's a pittance. And so they have to find a way of valuing. If you're going to go for younger players, those players have to be valued higher and paid better in their first 3 or 4 years when you're saying they're the studs and there's the guys that we want to pay. Now, when you have like a Machado or a Harper who are first blush free agents, and then Harper is 25, Machado was 28, you pay them out long term. It's a crazy contract to go 10, 13 years with anybody, but at least you're getting the prime of his career, from 28 to 33, from 25 to 33. It's a good part of the contract. You're going to be getting good value out of that contract if the player doesn't get hurt. But then again, if he does, you probably are paying very well for an insurance policy that's going to pay off the contract if he does. So, these are all part of the business of doing baseball, and I think there just has to be a restructuring of those things. But I think that what's going to happen is you're never going to be able to swing the pendulum back where the guys in their low to mid to late 30s are going to be paid any more and given any value.
So do you think the players union will now put their focus on getting guys paid more early because they realize that?
Yes, I think that's one of the things they're going to do. And I think the other thing is, they've got to find some, penalties for franchises that hide behind the draft and don't want to sign players and don't want to spend money. They don't want a floor and they don't want a cap. And really the luxury tax threshold in some cases acts as a de facto cap, but only on a limited amount of teams, because not too many teams. There are like 3 or 4 or 5 teams in Major League Baseball that are up around the $206 million luxury tax threshold. So that's really not a cap. And so they don't want to set a cap and the designated revenue. They don't want to set a floor that certain teams are going to pay. But, you also have to have some sort of incentive or disincentive for teams to come out and spend a certain amount of money on payroll to put a decent team on the field. You can't have these Miami, Baltimore situations, Kansas City. I mean, you can go down the list where teams are investing money or not investing money, and you start the season and basically you're telling your fans, we're in a 4 or 5 year building process. Hang with us. Well, if I'm a fan, I'd say, that's great. Well, if you're going to put a AAA team on the field or a AA, AAA team on the field for the next 3 or 4 years, then charge me double or AAA prices to come to the ballpark. That doesn't change. So you're charging major league prices for a minor league product. I mean, I laugh about it. And in fact, Tony Clark and I are pretty good friends. And when we see each other, we always have long, rambling conversations. And I told him, I'm for European-style soccer relegation now in Major League Baseball. That would be the ultimate penalty. that if the Padres year in and year out don't want to play, they go to the minor leagues the next year. I mean, the way it works in European soccer is that you have a Premier League and then you have two minor leagues, a championship league, and I don't even know what the other one's called. So the bottom three teams in each league every year get relegated to the lower league. And the top three teams in the lower level replace them at the next level. So if you had a great year in AAA and you replace the worst three teams in the major leagues, and let, the Padres or Baltimore or somebody, basically tell their fans that, hey, it's ball night or cap night on Saturday. Come out and see Syracuse play. What a great game that's going to be. It's a huge incentive to get teams to compete every year. It'll never happen, but Clark said he loved the idea. I don't know of any other way. The draft, and here's another thing I would do. I haven't talked to Clark about this, but the qualifying offers that are given each year, they go up every year. Last year it was like $18.3 million. I think they were extended to 8 or 9 players. Only one of those players, Ryu, took it from the Dodgers, and he's having a career year. Now, you can't repeat it. So next year, he's a total free agent, unencumbered free agent. And because of it, nobody can say, well, we don't want to lose the draft pick, we don't want to lose the tweener pick, we don't want to blah, 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 like they did with Keuchel and Kimbrel. Basically, waiting until after the draft so there was no draft pick compensation tied to their signings. If I'm the union, I would tell everyone next year, do a Messerschmitt, and basically tell these guys, everybody should accept the qualifying offer, and then in 2021, you're all going to be unrestricted free agents. And then you won't have to deal with this stuff in the open market or the excuses. Because it's just an excuse. The draft is an excuse. Losing draft position or losing a draft pick is bull. I mean, 18% of all players chosen in the draft get to the big leagues. And I don't know how many are, I've never seen a figure for how many of those are impact players, but I would bet 5% of those are impact players. So waiting around for draft picks is just ludicrous. It just shows you and your fan base that you really don't want to be competitive year in, year out and spend the money. You'd rather pocket the money.
No, I agree. And I'm surprised more players have not accepted the qualifying offer. What about
up until this year, the last 2 years, the qualifying offer in whatever form it's been used, and it's been used in different forms, it basically restricted that player. They didn't want to take the 1-year contract because they all felt they were going to get good deals that year in the market. Now we've shown that, as you said, to your point, the older players are not making any money anymore, and they're being left by the wayside. The younger players are not even, available. So you have the middle ground players who are, be given the qualifying offer to protect draft pick compensation. And so, there are some teams that won't give a guy that offer because they're afraid that guy is going to take the offer. It's probably going to be closer to $20 million, if not over, this year because it accelerates somewhat every year. It's based on a percentage of the amount of revenue that's generated in Major League Baseball. There's an equation for it, just like there is for everything. I can't be. I'm not that smart to figure that out. All I know is that it goes up marginally every year, and it's going to go up this year. And there are teams that are not going to give compensation for certain players because they're afraid that player is going to take it, and they're going to be, in the bag for the money. So quietly, if I were them, if I were the union, I wouldn't broadcast it, but I'd tell everybody in Major League Baseball who gets one to take one and then go into unencumbered free agency the next year.
And another thing, to take a look at is, it's like you say, they're generating over $10 billion a year in revenue, and the fact that the qualifying offer is tied to their gross revenue that has gone up every year, they're not hurting for money.
No, they're not hurting for money. I mean, some teams are making, like the Yankees and Dodgers are making so much money that, you know, it's like they're printing money in their own bank in the basement of the ballpark. And there are other teams like the Rays who, as far as their local revenue is concerned, are low, but they're still making an average $82 million a year on their television contract, local television contract. They have their ballpark revenue, whatever that may be. They have, their national television money, which is over $100 million. And they get revenue sharing as being a lower quadrant team as far as drawing local revenue, and that adds up to about $30 million a year. Plus whatever ticket money they make, it all goes into their pocket, and they have a low payroll. So, I mean, they've found a way of sustaining themselves and making money, and they could certainly spend more if they wanted to, not in the stratosphere that the Yankees, Dodgers, or Red Sox could spend, but certainly higher than the $70 million payroll that they had this year. I mean, if they went to 100, they might be still competitive in the East, right now. But yeah, every team. I've been making this argument for years. With $100 million that you get from national television, and it's probably higher now, or the national fund, you basically have that money should be earmarked to payroll, and that should be the minimum payroll of every team in Major League Baseball, because it's what the NFL does. The NFL's salary cap is essentially based on their television money, and so their salary cap, what they pay in payroll for their players, is covered by their national television money, and everything else they make is gravy above that. So yeah, it's the same thing in baseball, but you don't have the salary caps to force teams to pay that money out.
And didn't all the Major League Baseball teams recently get like a separate? I think it was an extra $50 million or something, like from a sale of Fox or a sale to Disney, or there was something
it was my old company, Major League Baseball Advanced Media. I was there for 17 years. They gave me my unconditional release last year, just after this deal was consummated. What they did was they had split up into a technology side and a baseball side. So you had Major League Baseball Advanced Media, or BAM, and then it was the other side was called BAM Tech, which housed all the apps, the streaming, video outside of baseball. They had the National Hockey League. They were doing a lot of different things. So Disney was so far behind in developing their own streaming video for ESPN and ABC that they basically just said, rather than spend all this research and development money to do this again ourselves, why don't we just buy it out in the open market? And BAM Tech was the system that was most developed and most coveted. So what happened was Disney bought a couple of years ago on a 5-year basis the rights to buy out all of BAM Tech, and they made an initial investment of about 25%, and it was supposed to be over 3 or 4 more years that they would buy the rest of it, but they decided the next year to just buy out to 75% and take over control of that part of the company. And as part of it, it was something like $3 billion, maybe a little bit more. So it was split up in somewhere around $80 million for each team. But in this case, and without getting too far in the weeds of it, when Major League Baseball started BAM or MLB.com in 2000, they each invested $2 million into it as a startup cost. And to their, undying, admiration from me, when they started making money on it, they constantly just reinvested it in the product, and so what they had eventually was, BAM itself, it was worth, it's like a house. You bought a house for $2 million, and now suddenly, with valuation and everything, it's worth $500 million. So each team had a $500 million valuation in just BAM and BAMTech itself. So the $80 million that each club made over it was really like an equity gain over the $2 million that they originally invested. It wasn't revenue that was generated by the clubs. So you have to look at that differently and basically say, you could pocket it, you could invest it, you can spend it on players, you can spend it on a stadium, you can do all kinds of different stuff with it. But there's no reason to believe that the club should have been earmarked to spend all that money on players, but they certainly could have.
I got it. One more thing before we wind up. Going back to Tampa, what do you see? What's your thoughts on Tampa staying there, Tampa moving, Tampa Montreal? What do you think about that particular situation?
I mean, from my reading of it, and I've talked to lawyers, I've read the leases. I mean, they have a pretty solid lease there at the Tropicana Dome till 2027. Now, I think you have some forces within, the county there, Pinellas County, that would like to tear down that stadium and use that land for something else and redevelop it. That it's worth a lot more money than having a standalone stadium there with really nothing around it, and they're not going to spend any money to redevelop around it. So, basically they have to wait. But the case is that, there is very strict wording in that lease, which doesn't give the Rays the right to leave even with a payoff. Now, I've had people say to me, well, everything can be paid off. Well, no. The Rays have been in the same situation for basically since they expanded into the American League in 1998. So basically say 10 years later, they knew they had to have a new facility in that area if they were going to want to survive. So, but they also knew that they were stuck in that dump till 2027. And that's where they are now. They're stuck in that dump to 2027. There's no way that they're going to allow the amount of money that they would get taken to court and any with a block on them, a temporary restraining order from them playing games anywhere else. Now, they signed a deal a couple of years ago, finally, after years of thrashing around with Pinellas County, they finally agreed and said, all right, we're not getting anywhere here, but we will, sign a deal with you so that you can look around the rest of the Tampa Bay area to find a place to play. And if you leave, this is the amount of money you will have to pay us on a diminishing, perspective, depending on how much time was left on the lease. So they wound up working with Hillsborough to build a new stadium in the Ibar district on the Tampa side of the bay. They had the plans. Tampa came up with Hillsborough County came up with the money. It was supposed to be a 50-50 split on about a $950 million stadium. So Hillsborough came up with the money, and they basically said to Stu Sternberg at that point, okay, we have the money, you put up the money, and let's get going and build a stadium. And at that point, Sternberg said, well, that's not enough money, we want more money. And the Hillsborough people said, well, we don't have any more money. There's no place for us to get any more money. And, we have, we've done what we were asked to do in good conscience. Now you in good conscience were supposed to put up the rest of the money. And instead of doing that, he let that agreement go away at the end of last year. So now they have no ability to negotiate with anyone other than Pinellas County again there. So the Montreal thing is just a subterfuge. I think it's essentially Major League Baseball wants to see what kind of interest there is in Montreal about building a new ballpark there, because I think if they could, they'd want to use it as an expansion site. But again, it's like put up or shut up at this point. Things in Montreal aren't much different than they were when the Expos left and went to DC in 2005. There's no new stadium. There's no money for it. There's no money in a relocation fee for a franchise or for a new franchise. I mean, an expansion franchise, when push comes to shove, it's going to be a $2 billion project. It's going to be about $1 billion for the franchise and $1 billion to build the ballpark. And nobody has that kind of money to put up in any new city, particularly Montreal, with a 33% exchange rate where everything goes up accordingly because you're dealing in American dollars and Canadian dollars, and it just doesn't work. So I don't think it's a lost leader. I wrote about this about a month ago too. I don't see it ever happening. And at some point, you're going to get closer to 2027, and baseball is going to have to put out an RFP and start a relocation committee, just like they did with the Expos. And they basically have to go out into the country or the hemisphere and see what cities really are interested in building a new ballpark and having that team relocate. So, and that's a while away already.
Yes and no. I mean, see, I wonder now. I mean, here it is. We're almost done with the 2019 season. Time flies. So yes. So after this season, there'll be 7 more seasons. But it's some point.
Actually,
8 more.
Seasons.
Okay.
Right.
So, but at some point, like
three or 4 years from now, Major League Baseball is going to have to put out an RFP to figure out if there's any interest in moving that franchise. And then they're going to have to go out and get an offer from somewhere and go back to, the people in Tampa and basically say, if you want to keep the franchise, this is what you're going to have to do. And I'm telling you, they're the 11th highest, the highest television market in the country. Major League Baseball does not want to lose that market, especially to go to Canada or go to Portland, which is the 27th or 28th market. It doesn't make any sense. They've got to figure a way, just like they're doing in Oakland at this point, and they're at least a quarter of the way of building that new ballpark in Oakland. After all these years, they're going to have to find a way of moving it forward in Tampa because they're not going to want to lose that market.
No, I know. I mean, you see now I'm living in the Orlando area, so I think what really hurts is the fact that the stadium itself is in St. Pete. So once you get into Tampa, you have another half an hour without rush hour traffic, okay, just to get from let's say downtown Tampa to St. Pete. And if you're going to a 7 o'clock game, well, unless you're getting there really, really early, now you have like you have like an extra hour. Particularly if you're coming from anywhere east, I just based on my limited knowledge of the area and having gone to Tampa quite a bit since I moved here, I'm thinking they're better served going right outside of Tampa, but east, like along the lines of maybe where they have the Hard Rock Casino or something over there, to try to go into the center of Tampa. I don't know if that's in their best interest either, because I think they would draw more from other parts of the state if they were just outside of Tampa, and I'm saying just a little east of I-4. That's just my own personal opinion, but it's just amazing how empty that stadium normally is unless the Yankees or the Red Sox are in town. And
now attendance to about 20,000. It's pretty empty anyway.
Yeah, this is true, but the attendance was so bad they actually blocked off certain sections, like they just covered the seats. I guess They feel as though it looks better, And I was there. I think I was there about a month ago. We were there for the Friday night game, when the Yankees played the Rays, and it felt like I was in Yankee Stadium as far as the crowd goes. And I'm sure it's the same way for a Red Sox game. So, anyway, Barry, listen, I really appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate you staying on as long as you did. You were great. You were great, as always.
Well, you're welcome. Glad I had the time.
Okay, and you'll be hearing from me again. You know that. But anyway, you have a great day, and thanks again.
You're welcome. Take care, Wayne.
Bye-bye. Folks, I hope you enjoyed the show. There's a wealth of baseball knowledge within that man. So, till next time.